What if I told you that in just 24 hours, our entire planet would transform from a thriving world teeming with giants into a desolate wasteland? What if I told you that the most dominant creatures to ever walk this earth would witness their final sunrise, completely unaware that by sunset, their reign of 165 million years would be over? This isn't science fiction. This isn't some distant fantasy. This actually happened. And today, we're going to walk through it minute by minute, hour by hour, as we witness the most catastrophic day in Earth's history. The day that changed everything. The day the dinosaurs died. I'm about to take you on a journey that will blow your mind. We're going back 66 million years to experience the final 24 hours of the dinosaurs. Not just the moment of impact, but the entire day leading up to it. What were these magnificent creatures doing in their final hours? How did the most successful animals in Earth's history spend their last morning? And when that 10-kilometer-wide space rock finally arrived, what exactly happened in those first terrifying minutes? By the end of this series, you'll understand why this single day reshaped the entire future of life on our planet. You'll see how one cosmic accident paved the way for mammals to rise, for flowers to bloom, and eventually for humans to exist. Without this day, you wouldn't be here watching this video right now, but here's what makes this story absolutely incredible. Scientists have pieced together this timeline with shocking accuracy. Using advanced computer modeling, geological evidence, and fossil records, we can now reconstruct this day with precision that would have been impossible just decades ago. We know the exact angle the asteroid hit. We know how fast it was traveling. We know the temperature of the fireball it created. We even know what the weather was like that morning. So let me set the stage for you. Picture Earth 66 million years ago, during what scientists call the late Cretaceous period. This isn't the Earth you know. This is a completely alien world, yet strangely familiar. The continents are in different positions. Where you might expect to see ice caps, there are none. The entire planet is a greenhouse, with carbon dioxide levels 5 times higher than today. Global temperatures average 10 degrees Celsius, warmer than our modern world. Imagine stepping into this world. The air is thick and humid, almost tropical everywhere you go. There are no polar ice caps, so sea levels are dramatically higher. Vast inland seas cover much of what we now call North America and Europe. These aren't just larger versions of our modern oceans either. These are warm, shallow seas that stretch for thousands of kilometers inland, creating a maze of islands, peninsulas, and coastal wetland. The plant life is extraordinary. Massive fern forests stretch as far as the eye can see. Towering conifer trees reach heights that dwarf our modern redwoods. And here's something fascinating. Flowering plants are relatively new on the scene. They've only been around for about 30 million years at this point, but they're already beginning to transform the landscape with their vibrant colors and complex relationships with early pollinators. But the real stars of this world are the dinosaurs. These aren't the sluggish, cold-blooded reptiles that old movies portrayed them as. Modern science has revealed them to be dynamic, warm-blooded creatures that dominated every ecological niche imaginable. Some are massive beyond comprehension. Others are small and agile, covered in colorful feathers. They've evolved into forms that seem almost too incredible to believe. Let me paint you a picture of what you might see on a typical day in this world. Herds of massive, long-necked sauropods, some weighing as much as 10 elephants, move slowly across open plains. Their necks stretch up to 20 meters into the canopy, allowing them to feed on vegetation no other creature can reach. The ground literally shakes under their footsteps. In the forests, quick-moving packs of feathered raptors hunt in coordinated groups. These aren't the monsters from Hollywood movies. They're intelligent, social creatures with complex behaviors and stunning plumage. Some are no bigger than chickens, others the size of wolves. They communicate with sophisticated vocalizations and work together with tactical precision that would impress any modern predator. And then there are the apex predators. Tyrannosaurus rex stalks through this world as the ultimate killing machine. Standing 6 meters tall and stretching 13 meters long, these creatures possess the most powerful bite force of any land animal that ever lived. Their massive skulls house brains surprisingly sophisticated for reptiles, and their keen senses make them nearly unstoppable hunters. But here's what's remarkable about this world. It's not just about the dinosaurs. This is an entire ecosystem in perfect balance. Small mammals scurry through the underbrush, most no bigger than rats, but they're already showing the adaptability that will eventually allow them to inherit the earth. Primitive birds share the skies with massive pterosaurs, some with wingspans exceeding 10 meters. Crocodiles and turtles patrol the waterways, looking remarkably similar to their modern descendants. The oceans teem with life forms that seem pulled from science fiction. Massive marine reptiles cruise the depths. Mosasaurs, some reaching 17 meters in length, rule the seas like aquatic dragons. Plesiosaurs with impossibly long necks glide through the water with graceful efficiency. Ancient sharks patrol these waters alongside creatures that have no modern equivalent. This world has been stable for millions of years. The climate is predictable. Food sources are abundant. Evolution has had time to craft creatures of incredible specialization and beauty. It's a world that seems destined to continue forever. But on this particular morning, 66 million years ago, something is different. High above the atmosphere, invisible to every creature on Earth, a visitor from deep space is racing toward our planet at unimaginable speed. This cosmic bullet has been traveling through the void for potentially millions of years, following a trajectory that will intersect with Earth's orbit at precisely the wrong moment. This isn't just any asteroid. This is what scientists call a C-type asteroid, rich in carbon and water ice. It's roughly 10 kilometers in diameter, which might not sound enormous until you realize that's about the size of Manhattan. But size isn't everything. What makes this asteroid truly terrifying is its speed. It's traveling at roughly 20 kilometers per second. That's 45,000 miles per hour. At that velocity, this chunk of rock and ice carries the kinetic energy of billions of nuclear weapons. As our story begins, it's approximately 6 in the morning, local time, somewhere in what will eventually become Mexico's Yucatan Peninsula. The sun is rising over a warm, shallow sea. Small waves lap against beaches that will be gone by nightfall. In the distance, A few small islands dot the horizon covered in lush vegetation. The local wildlife is beginning its daily routine. A flock of early birds takes to the sky, their calls echoing across the water. These aren't modern birds as we know them, but they're ancient relatives, still bearing traces of their dinosaurian heritage. Some retain small teeth in their beaks. Others have claws on their wings. They're evolutionary experiments that won't survive to see tomorrow. On land, massive herds of herbivorous dinosaurs are starting to move. Ceratopsians, those impressive three-horned giants with their elaborate neck frills, begin their morning march toward fresh feeding grounds. Their young stay close to their parents, instinctively sensing safety in numbers. These herds can stretch for kilometers, creating a thunderous rumble as thousands of multi-ton animals move across the landscape. A lone Tyrannosaurus rex emerges from a grove of conifers, scanning the area with keen eyesight. Its massive head swivels back and forth, nostrils flaring as it tests the air for the scent of potential prey. This apex predator has no natural enemies, no reason to fear anything in its world. It represents the pinnacle of terrestrial predator evolution, perfectly adapted to dominate this environment. In the shallow seas, marine life is equally active. Schools of primitive fish dart through the warm waters. Massive marine reptiles patrol the depths, their powerful tails propelling them through their three-dimensional hunting grounds. Ammonites, those spiral-shelled mollusks that have dominated the oceans for hundreds of millions of years, drift through the water column, completely unaware that they're about to become extinct forever. But high above, invisible and undetectable, death approaches at cosmic speed. The asteroid is now just hours away from impact. If these creatures could somehow perceive what was coming, they might notice a tiny point of light growing gradually brighter in the sky. But even the keenest-eyed pterosaur couldn't spot something so distant, and certainly couldn't comprehend its significance. This is the cruel irony of extinction events. Life continues its normal rhythms right up until the moment everything changes. These dinosaurs aren't living their last day with any sense of foreboding. They're simply living as their ancestors have lived for millions of years, following instincts honed by countless generations of successful survival. The young are learning. The adults are teaching. Predators are hunting. Prey animals are grazing. Complex social behaviors play out across the landscape. Territorial disputes are settled. Mating rituals are performed. The intricate web of life continues to function with the same efficiency it has maintained for geological ages. As the morning progresses, the pace of activity increases. The warming air creates thermals that lift the great pterosaurs high into the sky. These aerial giants, some with wingspans rivaling small aircraft, soar effortlessly on the rising currents. From their lofty perspective, they can see the vast scope of their world. Endless forests, winding rivers, inland seas, stretching to the horizon. What they cannot see is that their world has less than 12 hours left to exist. Deep beneath the ocean's surface, ancient currents carry nutrients that have sustained marine ecosystems for millions of years. Massive underwater forests of kelp-like plants sway in the gentle tides, providing shelter for countless species that have never known anything but this warm, stable world. Giant marine reptiles glide through these underwater cathedrals with the grace of living submarines, their massive forms perfectly adapted to life in these primordial seas. But something is changing in the upper atmosphere, something no creature on Earth has the ability to detect. The asteroid, now just 8 hours from impact, begins its final approach through the outer reaches of our planet's atmosphere. At this distance, it's still invisible to any earthbound observer, but the laws of physics are already beginning their deadly calculations. As we move toward mid-morning, the diversity of life across this ancient world becomes even more apparent. In the dense forests of what will one day become North America, small mammals scurry through the undergrowth, their survival strategies already showing the adaptability that will serve them well in the coming catastrophe. These creatures are nothing like the dominant mammals we know today. Most are tiny, furry animals that spend their lives hiding from the massive reptiles that rule this world. Yet even these small survivors are following patterns that have remained unchanged for millions of years. Mothers care for their young in hidden burrows. Males compete for territory and mates. The endless cycle of birth, growth, reproduction, and death continues exactly as it has for countless generations. Nature has no concept of the cosmic accident that's about to reset the entire evolutionary timeline. In the shallow inland seas, the morning hunt begins in earnest. Massive mosasaurs, those serpentine marine predators with skulls longer than a modern car, patrol their territories with methodical precision. Their powerful tails propel them through the water at speeds that would terrify any modern marine predator. These creatures are the undisputed rulers of their aquatic domain, perfectly evolved killing machines that have dominated these seas for millions of years. Schools of ancient fish part before them like living curtains, their silver scales catching the filtered sunlight that penetrates the clear waters. These fish have survived countless smaller extinction events, adapted to climate changes, and evolved alongside the great marine reptiles for so long that their relationship seems permanent and unbreakable. Above the water's surface, the sky fills with life. Pterosaurs of every conceivable size and shape take advantage of the warming air. Some are no larger than modern seagulls, darting and diving for small fish in the shallows. Others are giants with wingspans that dwarf any bird that will ever exist, soaring on thermals with an efficiency that seems to mock the laws of physics. These flying reptiles represent one of evolution's most successful experiments. They've conquered the skies in ways that won't be matched again until much smaller. Feathered creatures eventually claim the aerial domain, but today they rule the air with absolute authority, their keen eyes surveying a world that stretches endlessly in every direction. Back on land, the great herbivore migrations continue their timeless patterns. Vast herds of duck-billed hadrosaurs move across open plains, their distinctive calls echoing for kilometers. These creatures have evolved sophisticated social structures, complex communication systems, and feeding strategies that allow thousands of individuals to coexist in massive communities. Their young stay close to the adults, learning the subtle signals that indicate danger, the locations of the best feeding grounds, and the migration routes that their species has followed for millions of years. These youngsters will never have the chance to pass this knowledge on to their own offspring. Watching from elevated positions, the great predators calculate their opportunities. Pack of feathered dromaeosaurs, those intelligent pack hunters with their distinctive sickle-shaped claws, studies the herbivore herds with tactical precision. These creatures possess a level of intelligence that rivals many modern predators, capable of complex problem-solving and coordinated group hunting strategies. Their colorful plumage serves both as camouflage and communication, allowing pack members to coordinate their movements with subtle visual signals. Today, like every day for millions of years, they're planning their next hunt, completely unaware that they're participating in the final chapter of their evolutionary story. Meanwhile, high above the atmosphere, the asteroid continues its relentless approach. Now, just 6 hours from impact, it's beginning to interact with the outermost layers of Earth's atmosphere. These interactions are still too subtle to be noticed by any earthbound observer, but they mark the beginning of the end for the world below. As the day progresses toward noon, the pace of life accelerates across the planet. In the vast coniferous forests, massive sauropods begin their daily feeding routine. These giants, some weighing more than 12 modern elephants, use their incredibly long necks to reach vegetation that no other creature can access. Their feeding creates clearings in the forest canopy, allowing sunlight to reach smaller plants and creating microecosystems that support countless other species. The sounds these giants make are unlike anything in the modern world. Low-frequency calls that can travel for kilometers through the dense forest, allowing family groups to maintain contact across vast distances. These calls have echoed through these forests for millions of years, a constant background symphony of the Mesozoic world. Smaller dinosaurs take advantage of the clearings created by their giant relatives. Swift ornithopods, built for speed and agility, dart between the massive legs of the sauropods, feeding on the vegetation that falls from their high-altitude browsing. This relationship has evolved over millions of years into a perfectly balanced system of mutual benefit. In the forest understory, early flowering plants are beginning to show their true potential. These relatively recent evolutionary innovations have formed partnerships with primitive pollinators, creating some of the first complex plant-animal relationships that will eventually dominate terrestrial ecosystems. Colorful blooms attract early bees, butterflies, and other insects in an ancient dance of mutual survival. But even these recent evolutionary success stories are about to be cut short. The flowering plants that survive the coming catastrophe will be among the lucky few that manage to endure months of darkness and global cooling. As we approach the middle of the day, the asteroid has now entered the outer reaches of Earth's gravitational influence. Still invisible to ground-based observers, it's being pulled inexorably toward its appointment with our planet's surface. The cosmic dice were cast millions of years ago when this chunk of rock and ice was knocked out of its stable orbit in the outer solar system. The physics of the approaching collision are staggering. At 20 kilometers per second, this 10-kilometer-wide projectile carries kinetic energy equivalent to billions of thermonuclear weapons. When it strikes the Earth in just a few hours, it will release more energy in a single instant than our entire civilization has produced throughout all of human history. But for now, the world below continues its ancient rhythms. Ocean currents flow in patterns established over millions of years. Continental drift continues its imperceptibly slow reshaping of the planet's surface. The great cycles of evaporation and precipitation maintain the warm, humid climate that has supported this incredible diversity of life for geological ages. In the warm seas, coral reefs teem with life forms that have no modern equivalent. These ancient reefs are built by organisms that have been constructing underwater cities for hundreds of millions of years. Fish species that will never be seen again dart through the coral formations, their brilliant colors adapted for a world where predators and prey have been locked in evolutionary arms races since before the continents took their current shapes. Marine reptiles patrol the edges of these reefs like underwater dragons. Plesiosaurs with necks longer than their bodies glide through the water with serpentine grace, their four flippers propelling them through their three-dimensional hunting grounds with surprising speed and agility. These creatures represent one of evolution's most successful adaptations to marine life. A body plan so effective it remained virtually unchanged for over 100 million years. Above the reefs, the water surface breaks with the emergence of air-breathing marine reptiles coming up for oxygen. These moments of surfacing reveal glimpses of a world that seems almost fantasy-like in its abundance and diversity. The warm air carries the calls of seabirds, the splash of jumping fish, and the distant roars of massive creatures, both in the water and on the distant shores. As the sun reaches its zenith, marking the halfway point of this final day, the activity across the planet reaches its daily peak. This is the moment when the complex web of life that has taken millions of years to evolve operates at maximum efficiency. Predators hunt, prey, animals feed and reproduce, and the great cycles of birth and death continue exactly as they have for geological ages. The irony is profound. At the very moment when this ancient world is functioning at its peak, death approaches from space at cosmic velocity. In just a few short hours, all of this complexity, all of this beauty, all of these perfectly adapted relationships will be shattered by a visitor from the void between worlds. But there are no prophets in this world, no creatures capable of understanding what approaches. The dinosaurs, marine reptiles, flying pterosaurs, and countless other species continue their daily existence with the same confidence their ancestors have shown for millions of years. They are masters of their world, perfectly adapted to their environments, with no reason to expect that anything could threaten their dominance. The asteroid, now just 4 hours from impact, continues its silent approach through the vacuum of space, carrying with it the power to end an era and begin another. The tension in this story is building to an incredible crescendo, and what happens next will shock you to your core. We're now just 4 hours away from the moment that will redefine life on Earth forever. But the creatures below have no idea that their world is about to be obliterated. Picture this. Across the vast landscapes of the late Cretaceous, life is operating at peak efficiency. Every niche is filled. Every relationship has been refined by millions of years of evolution. This isn't just a functioning ecosystem. This is nature's masterpiece, a biological symphony that has been perfecting itself for longer than you can imagine. But here's where this gets absolutely mind-blowing. While all this incredible life continues below, that cosmic bullet is now close enough that if you could somehow zoom out and look at Earth from space, you might actually spot it as a tiny speck racing toward our planet. It's crossed the orbit of the moon. It's entered what scientists call Earth's sphere of influence. There's no turning back now. The physics of what's about to happen are so extreme, they border on the unbelievable. This asteroid isn't just falling toward Earth. It's being accelerated by our planet's gravity, gaining speed with every passing second. By the time it reaches the upper atmosphere, it will be moving at such incredible velocity that the very air in front of it will be compressed into a plasma shock wave. But let's stay with our creatures for now, because what they're experiencing in these final hours is both beautiful and heartbreaking. In the warm coastal waters off what will one day become the Gulf of Mexico, something extraordinary is happening. A massive migration is underway. Thousands of marine creatures are following ancient pathways that their species have used for millions of years. Giant sea turtles, some the size of small cars, navigate using magnetic fields and celestial cues that have guided their ancestors since before the continents took their current shapes. Schools of prehistoric fish move in coordinated formations that stretch for kilometers, their silver bodies flashing in the filtered sunlight. Above the water, pterosaurs are taking advantage of the afternoon thermals. These aren't just random flights. They're following migration routes that connect distant feeding grounds, breeding sites, and seasonal refuges. Some of these aerial highways have been used continuously for over 50 million years. Today marks the last time they will ever be traveled. The largest of these flying reptiles are truly spectacular. Quetzalcoatlus, with wingspans exceeding 10 meters, soar at altitudes that rival modern aircraft. From their perspective high above the earth, they can see weather patterns forming hundreds of kilometers away. They navigate using landmarks that have remained constant for geological ages. Mountain ranges, coastlines, and river systems that have guided countless generations. What they cannot see is the invisible visitor now racing toward them from space. On the ground below, the afternoon brings peak activity for the great herbivore herds. Massive triceratops, those three-horned giants with their elaborate neck shields, have gathered in unprecedented numbers. Scientists believe these creatures may have formed some of the largest herds in Earth's history, with gatherings that could include tens of thousands of individuals. These aren't mindless congregations. These herds have complex social structures, with older, experienced females leading younger animals to the best feeding grounds. Calves stay close to their mothers, learning the subtle signs that indicate danger, the locations of water sources, and the seasonal patterns that have governed their species' survival for millions of years. The sounds of these gatherings are unlike anything in the modern world. Deep, resonant calls that can be heard for dozens of kilometers, trumpeting sounds that echo off distant mountains, the thunder of millions of footsteps as the herds move across ancient migration routes. This acoustic landscape has remained virtually unchanged for geological ages. But here's what makes this moment so poignant. These young animals learning from their elders will never get the chance to pass that knowledge on. The wisdom accumulated over millions of years of evolution is about to be erased in a single afternoon. Meanwhile, the predators are watching and calculating. A group of Albertosaurus, those sleek relatives of T-Rex, have been tracking the herbivore herds for days. These aren't solitary hunters. Recent evidence suggests they may have hunted in coordinated packs, using sophisticated strategies to bring down prey much larger than themselves. Their keen intelligence is evident in everything they do. They test the wind direction to avoid detection. They position themselves to take advantage of terrain features. They communicate with subtle vocalizations and body language that allows the pack to coordinate their movements with military precision. These predators represent the pinnacle of terrestrial hunting evolution. Their sensory systems are so advanced they can detect the scent of potential prey from kilometers away. Their powerful legs can propel them at speeds exceeding 40 kilometers per hour in short bursts. Their massive skulls house brains sophisticated enough to plan complex hunting strategies. Today, like every day for the past several million years, they're planning their next hunt. They have no way of knowing they're about to become extinct. In the dense forests that cover much of the interior continents, a different drama is unfolding. The great sauropods are engaged in their daily feeding marathon. These giants must consume hundreds of kilograms of vegetation every day just to maintain their massive bodies. Their feeding creates a constant rain of plant material that supports entire ecosystems of smaller creatures. Compsognathus, those swift little dinosaurs no bigger than chickens, dart between the legs of their gigantic relatives, snatching up insects and small vertebrates disturbed by the giants' feeding. This relationship has evolved over millions of years into a perfectly balanced system where every participant benefits. The forest canopy above them is alive with activity. Early primates, tiny creatures that represent our own distant ancestors, leap from branch to branch with acrobatic skill. These small mammals have survived in this dinosaur-dominated world by being clever, adaptable, and above all, small enough to hide from the massive reptiles that rule the landscape. What's remarkable about these early mammals is how they're already displaying the behavioral flexibility that will eventually allow their descendants to inherit the earth. They're problem solvers. They're social creatures with complex communication systems. They care for their young longer than most reptiles, passing on learned behaviors rather than relying solely on instinct. But even their adaptability won't save most of them from what's coming. As the afternoon progresses, that cosmic projectile continues its relentless approach. Now, just 2 hours from impact, it's beginning to interact more significantly with Earth's outer atmosphere. These interactions create the first physical effects of the approaching catastrophe, though they're still too subtle to be detected by any creature on the surface. High-energy particles from the asteroid's passage begin to create unusual aurora displays at the very edge of space. If any creature could somehow observe these phenomena, they might see strange lights flickering at the boundary between Earth's atmosphere and the void beyond. But no Earth-bound observer has the ability to detect these early warning signs. The asteroid itself is now experiencing the first effects of atmospheric entry. Its outer surface begins to heat up as it encounters the tenuous gases at the very top of our atmosphere. This heating doesn't slow it down significantly. At these extreme velocities, even the thin upper atmosphere acts more like a liquid than a gas. But the real drama is still playing out on the surface below. In the shallow inland seas that cover vast portions of the continents, marine life continues its ancient rhythms with no awareness of the approaching catastrophe. Massive marine reptiles patrol territories they've held for decades. These creatures can live for over a century, and the largest individuals have witnessed the rise and fall of countless smaller species. They've survived climate fluctuations, volcanic eruptions, and other natural disasters that would devastate modern ecosystems. They have every reason to expect their dominance to continue indefinitely. Schools of ammonites drift through the warm waters like living nautiluses, their spiral shells catching the afternoon sunlight. These creatures have been among the most successful marine animals for over 300 million years. They've survived multiple mass extinctions, adapted to dramatic climate changes, and evolved into thousands of different species. Their fossil record represents one of evolution's greatest success stories. By tomorrow, they'll all be dead. The diversity of marine life in these ancient seas is staggering. Creatures that have no modern equivalent glide through underwater forests of kelp-like plants. Giant marine crocodiles, some reaching lengths of over 12 meters, patrol the coastal shallows with the confidence of apex predators. Their powerful jaws can crush the shells of the largest marine invertebrates with ease. Primitive whales, still bearing the skeletal remnants of their terrestrial ancestry, navigate these waters using echolocation systems that won't be matched in sophistication until much smaller mammals eventually return to the sea millions of years in the future. But perhaps the most impressive inhabitants of these ancient oceans are the mosasaurs. These marine lizards have evolved into forms that seem almost too incredible to believe. The largest species reached lengths of over 17 meters, with skulls longer than a modern automobile. Their powerful tails and streamlined bodies make them perfectly adapted for high-speed pursuit of prey in the open ocean. These creatures hunt with a ferocity and intelligence that rivals any modern predator. They're capable of diving to depths of several hundred meters, holding their breath for extended periods while pursuing prey through the three-dimensional maze of the ocean environment. Their keen senses allow them to detect the electrical fields generated by other creatures' muscle contractions, making them nearly impossible to evade. As the day wears on, these marine giants continue their eternal hunt, completely unaware that their underwater kingdom has less than 2 hours left to exist. Back on land, the late afternoon brings a change in activity patterns across the dinosaur communities. Many of the great herbivores begin to seek shelter for the approaching evening. Massive duck-billed hadrosaurs gather in protected valleys where they can rest safely through the night. Their complex social behaviors include sophisticated sentinel systems, with designated individuals keeping watch while the rest of the herd feeds or rests. These creatures have evolved communication systems that rival those of modern elephants. They can produce sounds across a wide range of frequencies, from subsonic rumbles that travel for kilometers to high-pitched calls that convey specific information about food sources, danger, or social status. Their elaborate head crests aren't just for display. They're acoustic resonators that amplify and modify their vocalizations. The intelligence of these creatures becomes apparent when you observe their problem-solving abilities. They modify their environment by creating trails, clearing vegetation, and even diverting small streams to create drinking pools. They pass knowledge from generation to generation through complex teaching behaviors that ensure young animals learn the skills necessary for survival. But all of this accumulated wisdom, all of these sophisticated adaptations, all of these complex social structures are about to be rendered meaningless by a visitor from space. The predators, meanwhile, are preparing for their evening hunts. As the temperature begins to cool slightly, the great tyrannosaurs become more active. These aren't the slow, lumbering monsters of popular imagination. Modern research has revealed them to be highly intelligent, possibly warm-blooded creatures with sophisticated hunting strategies. A large male T-Rex emerges from a grove of ancient conifers, its massive head swiveling as it scans the landscape. Its eyesight is extraordinary, better than that of modern hawks. Its sense of smell is so acute it can detect carrion from dozens of kilometers away. Its hearing is sensitive enough to pick up the subsonic communications of herbivore herds from vast distances. This apex predator represents the culmination of over 100 million years of theropod evolution. Every aspect of its anatomy has been refined for maximum hunting efficiency. Its powerful legs can propel its massive body at speeds that would surprise most modern animals. Its enormous skull houses a brain large enough to support complex problem-solving abilities and long-term memory formation. Yet for all its power and intelligence, this magnificent creature is completely helpless against what approaches from above. The asteroid is now just 90 minutes from impact. It's close enough that its gravitational influence is beginning to affect sensitive instruments, though no such devices exist in this ancient world. If they did, they might detect subtle variations in Earth's magnetic field, minute changes in atmospheric pressure, or other precursor phenomena that herald the approaching catastrophe. The space rock itself is now interacting more dramatically with Earth's upper atmosphere. Its surface temperature is rising rapidly as atmospheric compression begins to heat the asteroid's leading edge. At these extreme velocities, the very air becomes a weapon, creating shock waves that will eventually be visible from the ground. But still, the world below continues its ancient patterns. In the vast forests of the interior continents, nocturnal creatures are beginning to stir. Small mammals emerge from their daytime hiding places, their keen senses alerting them to opportunities and dangers in the gathering dusk. These creatures have survived in a world dominated by giants. Through superior intelligence, adaptability, and an almost supernatural ability to remain hidden. Early primates, no larger than modern shrews, begin their nightly search for insects and fruit. Their large eyes are adapted for low-light conditions, and their grasping hands allow them to navigate the three-dimensional maze of the forest canopy with remarkable agility. These tiny creatures represent our own evolutionary lineage, the humble ancestors from which all primates will eventually descend. What's extraordinary about these small survivors is their behavioral complexity. They use primitive tools, communicate with sophisticated vocalizations, and display problem-solving abilities that far exceed their brain size. They're already showing the cognitive flexibility that will eventually allow their much larger descendants to dominate the post-dinosaur world. But tonight, most of them will not survive to see the dawn. As the sun begins its descent toward the western horizon, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, the great migration corridors of the ancient world pulse with activity. Pterosaurs follow aerial highways that connect distant continents. Marine creatures navigate ocean currents that have flowed unchanged for millions of years. Terrestrial animals follow paths worn deep by countless generations of their ancestors. These migration routes represent some of nature's most sophisticated navigation systems. The creatures that use them employ magnetic compasses, star charts, and landmark recognition systems that rival modern GPS technology in their accuracy. Young animals learn these routes by following their elders, acquiring navigation skills that take years to master. The tragedy of what's about to happen extends beyond the immediate loss of life. These migration routes, refined over millions of years of evolution, will be broken forever. The knowledge that guides these incredible journeys will be lost with the creatures that possess it. In the warm seas off the ancient coastlines, something remarkable is happening. Massive marine reptiles are gathering in numbers never before seen. Scientists believe this may have been a seasonal phenomenon, possibly related to breeding or feeding opportunities that occurred at this time of year. The sight would have been absolutely spectacular. Hundreds of massive plesiosaurs, their long necks creating a forest of serpentine forms above the water's surface. Giant marine crocodiles basking in the shallows, their armored bodies gleaming in the afternoon sunlight. Schools of primitive fish, so vast they turn the water silver as far as the eye can see. This gathering represents the culmination of marine ecosystem development that has been ongoing for hundreds of millions of years. Every participant has evolved to fill a specific niche, creating a balance so perfect it seems designed by an intelligent hand. The complexity of the relationships between these creatures rivals anything in the modern world. But this ancient marine paradise has less than an hour left to exist. The asteroid, now just 60 minutes from impact, has begun to glow. The compression heating caused by its passage through the increasingly dense atmosphere has raised its surface temperature to several thousand degrees. If any creature on Earth possessed the ability to look directly at the approaching object, they might now see it as a rapidly brightening star racing across the sky. The laws of physics are beginning their final calculations. The kinetic energy of this cosmic projectile equivalent to over 100 million megatons of TNT, will be released in a single catastrophic instant. The explosion will be so powerful it will be visible from space, creating a fireball that briefly outshines the sun itself. But the creatures below remain blissfully unaware. The great herbivore herds continue their afternoon feeding. The marine reptiles patrol their ancient territories. The pterosaurs soar on thermals that have lifted countless generations of their ancestors. The small mammals prepare for another night of survival in a world ruled by giants. In 30 minutes, everything will change forever. As we enter the final 30 minutes before impact, something extraordinary is happening across the planet. The asteroid, now blazing through the upper atmosphere like a cosmic torch, has begun to create the first visible signs of the approaching catastrophe. But here's the thing that will absolutely blow your mind. Even at this late stage, with destruction literally racing toward them at 20 kilometers per second, the creatures below are still completely oblivious to their fate. Picture this scene unfolding across the ancient world. In the shallow coastal waters where massive marine reptiles have gathered for their seasonal congregation, the late afternoon sun creates a spectacular light show. The water's surface shimmers with an almost magical quality as thousands of creatures move through their underwater realm. Giant mosasaurs breach the surface with explosive power, their massive forms launching completely out of the water before crashing back down in displays of raw strength that send waves rippling for hundreds of meters. These aren't just random displays of power. These breaching behaviors serve specific purposes in their complex social hierarchy. Dominant males are establishing territory boundaries. Females are signaling their readiness to mate. Young individuals are practicing skills they'll need to survive in the competitive world of apex marine predators. But here's what makes this moment so incredibly tragic. These creatures are engaging in behaviors that have been refined over millions of years of evolution. Every movement, every call, every social interaction represents the culmination of countless generations of successful adaptation. They're operating at peak efficiency, perfectly suited to their environment, with no concept that their world is about to be obliterated. Meanwhile, high above the atmosphere, that 10-kilometer-wide harbinger of doom continues its relentless descent. The asteroid is now glowing so brightly from atmospheric compression that it's creating its own light show in the upper atmosphere. Plasma trails streak behind it like the tail of a comet, but these trails are composed of superheated air and vaporized asteroid material heated to temperatures exceeding the surface of the sun. The shock wave preceding the asteroid is now powerful enough to create atmospheric disturbances that sensitive instruments might detect, if such technology existed in this ancient world. The very fabric of the atmosphere is being torn apart by the passage of this cosmic intruder, creating pressure waves that race ahead of the main body at supersonic speeds. But let's return to the surface, because what's happening there in these final moments is both heartbreaking and beautiful. Across the vast continental forests, the great sauropods are engaged in their evening feeding ritual. These magnificent giants, some reaching lengths of over 30 meters and weights exceeding 80 tons, move through the ancient woodlands with surprising grace, despite their enormous size. A family group of Argentinosaurus, possibly the largest land animals that ever lived, feeds peacefully in a clearing created by their own massive presence. The parents use their incredibly long necks to reach vegetation 40 feet above the ground, while their young stay close to the safety of those pillar-like legs. The sounds they make are unlike anything in the modern world. Deep, resonant calls that vibrate through the ground and can be felt as much as heard. These calls serve multiple purposes. They maintain contact between family members scattered across the vast feeding areas. They warn of potential dangers. They even serve as a form of long-distance communication that allows different herds to coordinate their movements across the landscape. This acoustic network has connected sauropod communities across continents for millions of years. What's absolutely remarkable about these creatures is their intelligence. Recent research suggests that sauropods possess cognitive abilities far more sophisticated than previously imagined. They remember the locations of seasonal food sources across vast territories. They recognize individual members of their species and maintain complex social relationships that can last for decades. They even modify their environment, creating paths and clearings that benefit not just themselves, but entire ecosystems of smaller creatures. Yet all of this accumulated wisdom, all of these sophisticated behaviors, all of these perfect adaptations are about to become meaningless in just 25 minutes. The predators are equally active during these final moments. A pack of Utah raptor, those massive feathered hunters with their distinctive sickle-shaped claws, has been stalking a group of ornithopods for most of the afternoon. These aren't the human-sized raptors popularized by movies. These are creatures the size of small trucks, with intelligence that rivals modern wolves and hunting strategies that have been refined over millions of years of evolution. Their coordination is absolutely incredible to witness. Each pack member has a specific role in the hunt. The lead female uses her keen eyesight to track the prey's movements. Younger pack members position themselves to cut off escape routes. The largest males prepare for the final assault that will bring down prey animals many times their individual size. But here's what makes these creatures truly extraordinary. They're not just following instinct. They're problem-solving in real time, adapting their strategies based on the specific circumstances of each hunt. They communicate with subtle vocalizations, body language, and even what appears to be primitive tactical planning. They're capable of learning from previous hunts and modifying their techniques to become more effective predators. Their feathers aren't just for insulation or display. They're sophisticated communication tools. Different color patterns convey information about pack hierarchy, emotional state, and tactical intentions. The way they position their feathers can signal everything from aggressive intent to submission to readiness, to coordinate group actions. These magnificent predators represent the pinnacle of theropod evolution, the culmination of over 150 million years of increasingly sophisticated hunting adaptations. They're perfectly designed killing machines with intelligence to match their physical capabilities. In 20 minutes, they'll all be dead. As we move into the final quarter hour before impact, the diversity of life across this ancient planet reaches its daily peak. In the warm inland seas, massive marine reptiles are engaged in complex mating rituals that have remained unchanged for geological ages. Giant plesiosaurs perform elaborate underwater dances, their incredibly long necks intertwining in displays of grace that seem to defy the laws of physics. These courtship behaviors aren't simple or instinctive. They require precise timing, sophisticated communication, and the ability to coordinate complex movements in three-dimensional space. Successful mating pairs must synchronize their movements perfectly, often while swimming at considerable depths and dealing with strong underwater currents. The males compete for the attention of females through displays of strength, agility, and endurance that can last for hours. They demonstrate their fitness by performing aerial leaps that launch their massive bodies completely out of the water, creating spectacular splashes visible from kilometers away. The sounds of these competitions, deep, resonant calls that travel through the water for vast distances, create an acoustic landscape unlike anything in the modern world. But perhaps the most tragic aspect of these mating rituals is their timing. Many of these creatures are in the process of reproducing, preparing to lay eggs, or give birth to young that will never have the chance to grow up. The next generation of marine reptiles is being conceived at the very moment their world is about to end. Above the water's surface, the skies are filled with pterosaurs engaged in their own complex social behaviors. These flying reptiles have evolved into forms so diverse they seem to represent multiple experiments in powered flight. Some are tiny insect eaters with wingspans smaller than modern songbirds. Others are giants with wings that span over 30 feet, soaring at altitudes that won't be reached again by flying creatures until much smaller birds eventually evolve similar capabilities. The largest pterosaurs are engaging in spectacular aerial displays that showcase the incredible sophistication of their flight capabilities. They ride thermals with an efficiency that seems to mock the laws of physics, using minimal energy to stay aloft for hours, while covering hundreds of kilometers in their daily travels. These creatures navigate using a combination of visual landmarks, magnetic field detection, and possibly even celestial navigation that allows them to find their way across vast distances with pinpoint accuracy. Their migration routes connect distant continents, creating aerial highways that have been in continuous use for millions of years. But in 15 minutes, these ancient flight paths will be traveled for the last time. The asteroid is now close enough that its passage is beginning to create detectable atmospheric disturbances. The shock wave preceding it is compressing the upper atmosphere with such force that it's creating unusual aurora displays and electromagnetic phenomena that would be visible to any creature capable of detecting such things. The space rock itself is now glowing like a miniature sun, its surface heated to temperatures that would instantly vaporize any known material. The plasma trail behind it stretches for hundreds of kilometers, creating a spectacular light show that's unfortunately occurring too high in the atmosphere to be visible from the surface. But the real drama continues to unfold on the ground below. In the dense forests that cover the interior continents, small mammals are beginning their evening activities. These creatures, most no larger than modern house cats, represent our own distant ancestors, the humble beginnings from which all modern mammals will eventually evolve. What's extraordinary about these early mammals is their behavioral complexity despite their small size. They use primitive tools, fashioning simple implements to extract insects from tree bark or crack open hard-shelled nuts. They communicate with sophisticated vocalizations that convey information about food sources, potential dangers, and social relationships. Their social structures are remarkably advanced for such ancient creatures. Family groups maintain territories that they defend cooperatively. Parents teach their young essential survival skills through complex play behaviors. They even appear to have primitive forms of culture, with different populations developing unique techniques for finding food or avoiding predators. These small survivors have thrived in the shadow of the dinosaurs by being smarter, more adaptable, and more behaviorally flexible than their giant neighbors. Their success in this dinosaur-dominated world comes not from size or strength, but from intelligence and the ability to exploit ecological niches that the larger reptiles cannot access. Ironically, these very traits, small size, behavioral flexibility, and the ability to survive on limited resources, will be exactly what allows some of their descendants to survive the coming catastrophe. But most of the individuals alive today will not see tomorrow's sunrise. As we enter the final 10 minutes before impact, something remarkable is happening across the planet. Despite the approaching cosmic catastrophe, life continues its ancient rhythms with the same intensity and complexity that has characterized this world for millions of years. Predators hunt with tactical precision. Herbivores feed and care for their young. Marine creatures navigate vast oceanic territories using skills refined over geological ages. A massive herd of triceratops, those three-horned giants with their elaborate neck shields, has gathered in an ancient river valley for their evening watering ritual. This isn't just a simple gathering to drink. It's a complex social event that serves multiple functions in their sophisticated community structure. Older, experienced females lead the herd to the safest drinking spots, locations that have been used by their species for thousands of generations. Young animals learn not just where to drink, but when it's safe to approach the water, how to detect potential predators, and the social protocols that govern herd behavior. The dominant males patrol the perimeter of the gathering, their massive heads swiveling constantly as they watch for any sign of danger. Their elaborate neck frills aren't just defensive armor. They're also communication devices, capable of displaying colors and patterns that convey information about their emotional state, social status, and territorial claims. These creatures possess intelligence that rivals modern elephants. They remember the locations of seasonal water sources across vast territories. They recognize hundreds of individual herd members and maintain complex social relationships that can span decades. They even appear to mourn their dead, gathering around deceased herd members in behaviors that suggest genuine emotional attachment. But in just a few minutes, all of this social complexity, all of these learned behaviors, all of these sophisticated relationships will be obliterated by a visitor from space. The asteroid is now so close that its gravitational influence is beginning to create subtle effects that sensitive organisms might detect. Migrating birds, if they possess the sensory capabilities, might notice slight disturbance in Earth's magnetic field. Creatures sensitive to atmospheric pressure changes might detect the minute variations caused by the approaching shock wave. But no creature on this ancient Earth possesses the knowledge or sensory equipment necessary to understand what these subtle changes mean. They continue their daily activities with the same confidence their ancestors have shown for millions of years, completely unaware that they're living through the final moments of their world. In the warm coastal waters, the great marine reptiles are reaching the peak of their evening activity period. Massive mosasaurs engage in territorial disputes that showcase their incredible power and agility. These creatures, some reaching lengths of over 50 feet, move through the water with the grace of living torpedoes despite their enormous size. Their hunting strategies are incredibly sophisticated. They use echolocation systems to track prey in murky water. They coordinate group hunts that allow them to take down prey much larger than themselves. They even appear to use tools, manipulating floating debris to create ambush positions or communication signals. The diversity of marine life in these ancient seas is staggering. Creatures that have no modern equivalent patrol underwater forests of kelp-like plants. Ancient sharks, some reaching lengths that dwarf their modern descendants, cruise through waters teeming with life forms that seem pulled from science fiction. Schools of ammonites, those spiral-shelled cephalopods that have dominated marine ecosystems for over 300 million years, drift through the water column in formations that stretch for kilometers. Their sophisticated jet propulsion systems allow them to maneuver with precision that won't be matched by any marine creature until much smaller squid and octopi eventually evolve similar capabilities. These creatures represent one of evolution's most successful experiments. They've survived multiple climate changes, adapted to dramatic shifts in ocean chemistry, and evolved into thousands of different species that fill every conceivable marine niche. Their fossil record tells the story of life's incredible resilience and adaptability. In 5 minutes, they'll all be extinct. As we approach the final moments before impact, the asteroid has become a blazing meteor, visible to any creature that happens to look up at the sky. It's now traveling through the dense lower atmosphere, creating a shock wave so powerful it's generating sonic booms that could theoretically be heard from hundreds of kilometers away. The space rock itself is undergoing dramatic changes as it plunges toward the surface. The intense heat generated by atmospheric compression is beginning to vaporize its outer layers, creating a plasma trail that stretches across the sky like a sword of fire. The asteroid's surface temperature now exceeds 10,000 degrees Celsius, hot enough to melt any known substance. But incredibly, even at this late stage, the creatures below remain unaware of their fate. The great herbivore herds continue their evening migrations. The marine reptiles patrol their ancient territories. The pterosaurs soar on thermals that have lifted countless generations of their ancestors. In the forests of the interior continents, a different kind of drama is unfolding. Massive theropod predators are engaging in territorial disputes that showcase the incredible sophistication of dinosaur behavior. These aren't mindless monsters fighting over resources. They're intelligent creatures with complex social hierarchies engaging in ritualized combat that usually results in minimal injury to the participants. A pair of massive Carcharodontosaurus, those shark-toothed giants that rival T-Rex in size and ferocity, face off in a forest clearing. Their elaborate threat displays involve precisely choreographed movements, vocalizations that can be heard for kilometers, and posturing that communicates their intentions without immediately resorting to violence. These creatures understand the risks of serious combat. Injuries that might seem minor to smaller animals can be fatal to creatures of this size. Their threat displays allow them to assess each other's strength, health, and determination without engaging in potentially lethal combat unless absolutely necessary. The intelligence required for these complex social interactions is staggering. Each participant must read subtle body language cues, interpret vocalizations with precise meaning, and make strategic decisions about when to escalate or retreat from confrontation. They're engaging in psychological warfare that requires cognitive abilities rivaling those of modern great apes. But in just 3 minutes, all of this behavioral sophistication will be rendered meaningless by the laws of physics. The asteroid is now close enough that creatures with exceptional eyesight might actually spot it as a rapidly brightening point of light racing across the sky. If any dinosaur happened to look up at this moment, they might see what appears to be a new star being born, growing brighter by the second as it streaks toward the horizon. But even if they could see it, they would have no context for understanding what it means. These creatures have no concept of asteroids, space, or cosmic impacts. To them, it might appear as nothing more than an unusually bright meteor, perhaps worthy of momentary curiosity before they return to their daily concerns. The irony is profound. The most intelligent creatures on the planet are about to be destroyed by something they couldn't possibly comprehend, even if they were aware of its approach. Their millions of years of evolutionary success, their perfect adaptation to their environment, their sophisticated behaviors and complex social structures, none of it matters in the face of cosmic chance. As we enter the final 60 seconds before impact, something extraordinary happens. The asteroid, now blazing through the lower atmosphere like a piece of the sun itself, creates a light show so spectacular it briefly illuminates the entire sky. Any creature that happens to be looking up at this moment witnesses something that has never been seen before and will never be seen again. The shock wave preceding the asteroid is now so powerful it's creating atmospheric disturbances that extend for hundreds of kilometers in all directions. Trees begin to sway from pressure waves traveling faster than sound. Birds take flight in confusion as their sensitive inner ears detect pressure changes that signal danger they can't identify. But even now, with destruction literally seconds away, most of the creatures below continue their ancient activities. They're following behavioral patterns so deeply ingrained by millions of years of evolution that they continue to function even as their world approaches its end. In 30 seconds, the asteroid will strike the shallow sea off what will one day become Mexico's Yucatan Peninsula. The impact will occur at an angle of approximately 60 degrees from horizontal, maximizing the amount of debris ejected into the atmosphere. The collision will happen so fast that the asteroid will be completely vaporized before the shock of impact even begins to propagate through the Earth's crust. But for now, for these final precious seconds, the ancient world continues unchanged. Dinosaurs rule the land as they have for over 100 million years. Marine reptiles dominate the seas as they have for geological ages. Pterosaurs command the skies as they have since before the continents took their current shapes. In 20 seconds, all of that will end forever. The creatures of this ancient world have no way of knowing they're living through the final moments of the Mesozoic era. They cannot comprehend that they're about to witness the end of the age of reptiles and the beginning of something entirely new. They're simply living as their ancestors have lived for millions of years, following instincts and behaviors that have served their species well through countless challenges. But no evolutionary adaptation, no matter how sophisticated, can prepare them for what's about to happen. In 10 seconds, a visitor from the depths of space will collide with our planet with the force of billions of nuclear weapons. The explosion will be visible from orbit, creating a fireball that briefly rivals the sun in brightness. The shock wave will circle the globe multiple times, and the debris ejected into the atmosphere will darken the skies for months. But that's just the beginning. What happens in the minutes and hours following impact will be even more devastating, and it's a story that will leave you absolutely stunned. The countdown has reached its final moments. In 5 seconds, the asteroid will make contact with Earth's surface. In 4 seconds, the laws of physics will begin to unleash forces beyond imagination. In 3 seconds, the Cretaceous period will begin its violent end. In 2 seconds, the future of life on Earth will be forever changed. In 1 second, everything changes. The moment of impact arrives with a violence that defies human comprehension. At exactly 3:47 p.m. local time, the 10-kilometer asteroid slams into the shallow coastal waters with the force of 100 billion atomic bombs detonating simultaneously. The collision happens so fast that time itself seems to pause. In less than a second, the entire asteroid is completely vaporized, its cosmic journey of millions of years ending in an instant of unimaginable destruction. But here's what will absolutely blow your mind about this moment. The impact doesn't just destroy the asteroid, it fundamentally alters the very structure of our planet. The force is so immense that it punches completely through the Earth's crust, creating a crater that will eventually measure 200 kilometers across and 20 kilometers deep. That's a hole so massive you could fit the entire state of Rhode Island inside it with room to spare. The physics of what happens in this first second are beyond anything we experience in our daily lives. The asteroid strikes the Earth at 20 kilometers per second. That's 60 times faster than a rifle bullet. At that velocity, the kinetic energy doesn't just create an explosion. It creates something entirely new. The impact site instantly becomes hotter than the surface of the sun, reaching temperatures of over 15,000 degrees Celsius. Picture this. In the first millisecond after impact, a dome of superheated plasma begins expanding outward from the collision point. This isn't fire as we understand it. This is matter so hot that electrons are stripped from atoms, creating a ball of pure energy that grows faster than the speed of sound. Any creature within 1,000 kilometers of the impact site is about to experience temperatures that would instantly vaporize steel. The marine reptiles that had been peacefully swimming in these coastal waters just moments before don't even have time to react. Massive mosasaurs, those serpentine predators that had ruled these seas for millions of years, are vaporized so quickly they simply cease to exist. The water around them doesn't boil. It instantly converts to superheated steam, creating a pressure wave that races outward at supersonic speeds. But the destruction extends far beyond the immediate impact zone. Within the first 5 seconds, something called a base surge begins to form. This is a wall of superheated debris, vaporized rock, and plasma that expands outward from the crater at speeds exceeding 1 kilometer per second. Imagine a tsunami made of molten rock and fire, traveling faster than any creature could possibly flee. The Triceratops herds that had been peacefully drinking at riverside watering holes 500 kilometers away suddenly find themselves facing something their evolutionary programming never prepared them for. The ground beneath their feet begins to shake with an intensity that makes the strongest earthquakes seem like gentle tremors. Trees that have stood for centuries are uprooted and flung through the air like matchsticks. These magnificent creatures, each weighing as much as a modern truck, are tossed about like leaves in a hurricane. Their massive neck shields, evolved to protect them from the teeth and claws of predators, offer no defense against the cosmic forces now unleashed upon their world. The dominant males that had spent the afternoon establishing territorial boundaries find themselves completely helpless as the very ground beneath them liquefies from the seismic shock. Meanwhile, that expanding fireball continues to grow at an apocalyptic pace. Within 10 seconds of impact, it reaches a diameter of over 100 kilometers, turning everything it touches into component atoms. The shallow sea that had teemed with ancient life just moments before is now a cauldron of vaporized rock and superheated gas expanding at velocities that challenge the speed of sound itself. The pterosaurs that had been soaring peacefully on afternoon thermals suddenly find themselves caught in atmospheric disturbances, unlike anything their species has ever encountered. These master aviators, some with wingspans exceeding 10 meters, are skilled at reading air currents and weather patterns. They can detect pressure changes that herald approaching storms from hundreds of kilometers away. But nothing in their evolutionary history has prepared them for this. The shock wave racing outward from the impact site creates pressure differentials so extreme they literally tear the atmosphere apart. Pterosaurs flying at altitudes of several thousand meters suddenly find themselves in a partial vacuum as the air around them is compressed and displaced by forces beyond their comprehension. Their sophisticated flight membranes, perfectly adapted for soaring efficiency, are shredded by pressure waves traveling faster than they could possibly fly. But here's where this gets even more terrifying. The immediate destruction at the impact site is just the beginning. The collision has launched trillions of tons of debris into the atmosphere at velocities exceeding escape velocity. Some of this material is traveling so fast it actually leaves Earth's gravitational influence entirely, carrying pieces of our planet into deep space, where they'll drift for millions of years. The rest of this debris follows ballistic trajectories that will bring it crashing back down across the entire globe. But this isn't just rock and dirt. This is material that has been superheated to temperatures exceeding 3,000 degrees Celsius. When it begins raining back down on the surface in about 20 minutes, it will create a global firestorm that makes the initial impact look tame by comparison. 15 seconds after impact, the seismic waves generated by the collision begin to propagate through the Earth's crust. These aren't ordinary earthquakes. They're magnitude 10 or higher events that literally shake the entire planet. The energy released is so enormous that it can be detected on the opposite side of the globe, 12,000 kilometers away from the impact site. In the dense forests, where massive sauropods had been peacefully feeding just moments before, the ground begins to buckle and heave with forces that defy description. Trees that have stood for hundreds of years are not just uprooted. They're launched into the air by pressure waves traveling through solid rock. The Dinosaurs families that had been using their incredibly long necks to feed from the highest branches suddenly find themselves in a world where up and down have lost all meaning. These giants, some weighing over 80 tons, are helpless against forces of this magnitude. Their massive bodies, perfectly adapted for supporting their enormous weight under normal gravitational conditions, become liabilities as the ground beneath them liquefies and erupts. Parents that had been protectively watching over their young find themselves unable to even maintain their footing as earthquake waves larger than anything in recorded geological history shake their world apart. The sound of this destruction is beyond anything these creatures have ever experienced. The initial impact creates a sonic boom so powerful it can be heard over 2,000 kilometers away. But that's just the beginning. As the shock wave propagates outward, it creates a continuous thunderclap that lasts for over 10 minutes. A sound so loud it would permanently damage the hearing of any modern human exposed to it. 20 seconds after impact, the thermal pulse begins to reach creatures at significant distances from the collision point. This isn't heat as we normally understand it. This is thermal radiation intense enough to ignite organic material instantly. The pack of Utah raptor that had been coordinating their evening hunt 800 kilometers from the impact site suddenly find themselves facing temperatures that would melt lead. These intelligent predators, with their sophisticated communication systems and tactical hunting strategies, have no evolutionary framework for understanding what's happening to them. Their colorful feathers, which had served as complex communication tools just moments before, burst into flame. The forest around them erupts in fires so intense they create their own weather systems, generating winds that exceed hurricane force. But perhaps the most heartbreaking aspect of these first crucial seconds is how the different species react according to their evolutionary programming. The great herbivore herds instinctively cluster together, seeking safety in numbers as they have for millions of years. But there is no safety to be found. The dominant males position themselves between their families and the perceived threat. But how do you protect your offspring from thermal radiation and seismic waves? The predators, programmed by millions of years of evolution to be territorial and aggressive, initially respond to the crisis by defending their hunting grounds. Massive Tyrannosaurus rex roar their challenges into the chaos, their powerful vocalizations lost in the overwhelming cacophony of destruction. Their keen intelligence allows them to recognize that something unprecedented is happening, but their behavioral responses are still governed by instincts that have no relevance to cosmic catastrophe. 30 seconds after impact, the destruction enters a new phase that scientists call the excavation stage. The initial vaporization of the asteroid and surrounding bedrock creates a cavity so large and deep that it temporarily defies gravity itself. Rock that has been solid for millions of years is now behaving like a fluid, flowing and splashing in slow motion as the crater walls collapse and rebound. This excavation process ejects even more material into the atmosphere, creating secondary shock waves that compound the destruction already spreading across the planet. The debris cloud rising from the impact site now reaches altitudes of over 50 kilometers, punching through the stratosphere and into the mesosphere where no earthbound creature has ever ventured. The marine ecosystems that had flourished in the shallow coastal seas are experiencing devastation on a scale that defies description. The massive marine reptiles that had been engaged in their complex mating rituals just minutes before are now caught in water that has been superheated to temperatures exceeding boiling point. But the water doesn't just boil, it flash vaporizes, creating steam explosions that propagate through the ocean basins at supersonic speeds. Schools of ammonites, those spiral-shelled cephalopods that have survived multiple previous extinction events over their 300 million-year evolutionary history, find their sophisticated jet propulsion systems utterly useless against forces of this magnitude. Their shells, evolved to withstand the crushing pressures of the deep ocean, collapse instantly when subjected to pressure waves that exceed anything in their geological experience. The giant Plesiosaurs, those graceful marine reptiles with necks longer than their bodies, had been perfectly adapted for three-dimensional movement through their aquatic environment. But now that environment is being transformed into something that no longer resembles an ocean. The water around them is simultaneously boiling, freezing, and being blasted into space by forces that challenge the fundamental laws of physics as these creatures understand them. 45 seconds after impact, the atmospheric disturbances reach creatures living thousands of kilometers from the collision point. The small mammals that represent our own distant ancestors, those tiny survivors that had thrived in the shadow of the dinosaurs through superior intelligence and adaptability, suddenly find themselves facing challenges that no amount of behavioral flexibility can overcome. These early primates, no larger than modern shrews, but already displaying the cognitive capabilities that will eventually allow their descendants to understand the very cosmic forces now destroying their world, huddle in their burrows as the air above them reaches temperatures that would ignite wood. Their underground refuges, which had protected them from predators and environmental challenges for millions of years, now become ovens as superheated air is forced through every crack and crevice in the landscape. But here's what makes their situation particularly tragic. These creatures possess just enough intelligence to recognize that something catastrophic is happening, but not enough knowledge to understand what it means. They can sense the danger, feel the terror, experience the confusion of a world suddenly gone mad, but they have no framework for comprehending the cosmic accident that has doomed their planet. 1 minute after impact, the destruction has reached truly global proportions. The debris ejected from the crater is now beginning its ballistic journey around the world, carrying with it temperatures hot enough to ignite any organic material it encounters. This isn't just falling rock. This is a global rain of molten projectiles that will set the entire planet on fire. The pterosaurs that had been following their ancient migration routes, navigating by landmarks that had remained constant for geological ages, find those landmarks disappearing in explosions of superheated debris. Mountain ranges are being reshaped by seismic forces. Coastlines are being redrawn by tsunami waves that dwarf anything in recorded geological history. The very geography these creatures had used for navigation is being erased before their eyes. Those massive aerial giants with wingspans exceeding 10 meters, masters of reading atmospheric conditions and weather patterns, find themselves flying through air that has been transformed into a hellscape of superheated gases and debris clouds. Their sophisticated sensory systems, evolved to detect the subtle pressure changes that indicate thermals and wind patterns, are overwhelmed by atmospheric disturbances that exceed the measurement scales of their evolutionary experience. The great sauropod herds, those gentle giants that had been peacefully feeding in forest clearings just minutes before, are now experiencing temperatures that would melt aluminum. Their massive bodies, which had allowed them to reach vegetation no other creature could access, now work against them as they struggle to find shelter from thermal radiation that penetrates deep into the forest canopy. Parents that had been teaching their young the locations of seasonal feeding grounds watch helplessly as those feeding grounds burst into flames around them. The accumulated wisdom of millions of years of evolution, knowledge about migration routes, water sources, safe sleeping areas, and seasonal cycles, becomes irrelevant in a world where the fundamental rules of survival have been rewritten by cosmic forces. 2 minutes after impact, something even more terrifying begins to happen. The debris that was ejected into space during the first seconds of the collision starts to rain back down across the entire planet. This material has been superheated to temperatures exceeding 3,000 degrees Celsius. And when it encounters the atmosphere during re-entry, it creates a global firestorm that ignites organic material on every continent simultaneously. Picture this. Across the entire planet, from the frozen polar regions to the tropical equatorial forest, the sky begins to glow with the light of countless meteors burning through the atmosphere. But these aren't ordinary meteors. They're pieces of Earth itself, launched into space by the impact and now returning as harbingers of global destruction. The herbivorous dinosaurs that had been grazing peacefully in open plains suddenly find themselves surrounded by fires that spring up spontaneously across the landscape. The triceratops and hadrosaur herds that had been following migration routes used by their ancestors for millions of years find those ancient pathways blocked by walls of flame that stretch from horizon to horizon. These creatures, perfectly adapted for processing vast quantities of plant material, watch as their food sources are consumed by fires that burn with an intensity they've never encountered. The sophisticated social structures that had allowed them to coordinate the movements of thousands of individuals across continental distances become meaningless when there's nowhere safe to migrate. The pack-hunting predators fare no better. Those intelligent dromaeosaurs, with their complex communication systems and tactical coordination, find their hunting strategies useless against prey that has been incinerated by thermal radiation. The elaborate social hierarchies that had governed their behavior for millions of years collapse as survival becomes a purely individual struggle against forces beyond their comprehension. 3 minutes after impact, the global firestorm reaches peak intensity. Forests that have stood for millions of years are consumed in minutes. Grasslands that supported vast herbivore herds become seas of flame that generate their own weather systems. The very air becomes so hot and filled with smoke that breathing becomes impossible for most terrestrial creatures. But the marine environments are experiencing their own unique form of devastation. The tsunami generated by the impact has now propagated across entire ocean basins, creating waves that reach heights of over a kilometer in some coastal areas. These aren't ordinary tsunamis. They're walls of superheated water moving at speeds that exceed anything in the geological record. The coastal wetlands and swamps that had provided crucial habitat for countless species are completely obliterated. The delicate balance between fresh and salt water that had supported unique ecosystems for millions of years is destroyed in minutes as massive volumes of superheated seawater are driven kilometers inland. The marine reptiles that had adapted to specific salinity levels and water temperatures find their carefully balanced physiologies overwhelmed by rapid changes in their aquatic environment. Creatures that had thrived in warm, stable seas for geological ages are suddenly faced with water that alternates between boiling and freezing as massive energy transfers reshape the global ocean system. 4 minutes after impact, the atmospheric composition itself begins to change dramatically. The enormous quantities of vaporized rock, water, and organic material ejected into the atmosphere start to alter the chemical balance that has supported life on Earth for hundreds of millions of years. Carbon dioxide levels spiked to concentrations not seen since the planet's earliest history. The pterosaurs, still struggling to stay aloft, find themselves flying through air that no longer provides the oxygen concentrations their respiratory systems require. These creatures, perfectly adapted for efficient oxygen extraction at high altitudes, suddenly find themselves suffocating in an atmosphere that has been fundamentally altered by the collision. Their sophisticated flight membranes, evolved over millions of years to provide maximum lift efficiency, become useless as the air density and chemical composition change faster than their physiology can adapt. Masters of the sky, for over 100 million years, find themselves grounded by atmospheric conditions that no flying creature has ever experienced. 5 minutes after impact, something truly apocalyptic begins to happen. The shock wave from the collision has now traveled completely around the Earth and is beginning to converge on the point directly opposite the impact site. This convergence creates what scientists call an antipodal focusing effect. Essentially, all the energy from the impact that has been traveling through the Earth's interior focuses on a single point on the opposite side of the planet. The result is a secondary explosion of volcanic activity that makes the original impact look restrained by comparison. Massive lava flows begin erupting simultaneously across what will one day become India, creating additional clouds of toxic gases and superheated debris that compound the already catastrophic atmospheric conditions. The dinosaur populations living in these regions experience a double catastrophe. Not only are they dealing with the global effects of the asteroid impact, but they're also facing massive volcanic eruptions that turn their local environment into a hellscape of molten rock and poisonous gases. Herds of ceratopsians that had been following seasonal migration routes find themselves trapped between advancing walls of lava and the global firestorm ignited by falling debris. Their elaborate social behaviors evolved to help them navigate normal environmental challenges become tragically inadequate when faced with multiple simultaneous catastrophes. The great predators, those apex hunters that had ruled terrestrial ecosystems for over 100 million years, find themselves in a world where there is nothing left to hunt. The complex food webs that had supported their existence for geological ages collapse in minutes as primary producers are consumed by flames and herbivores succumb to thermal radiation. 10 minutes after impact, the destruction has reached a scale that challenges our ability to comprehend it. The entire planet is now experiencing environmental conditions more extreme than anything in its 4 billion-year history. The stable climate that had supported the evolution of complex life forms has been replaced by a chaotic system driven by energies that dwarf all natural processes. The small mammals that had survived in the shadow of the dinosaurs through behavioral flexibility and adaptability find even their impressive survival skills inadequate against forces of this magnitude. Those early primates that represent our own evolutionary lineage huddle in whatever shelter they can find. Their sophisticated social behaviors reduced to simple terror as their world burns around them. But here's what makes this moment so profoundly significant for the future of life on Earth, while the largest, most specialized creatures are experiencing complete ecosystem collapse. Some of the smallest, most adaptable survivors are already beginning the process that will eventually lead to recovery. Their small size and lower metabolic requirements will allow a few individuals to survive the months of darkness and environmental chaos that lie ahead. 15 minutes after impact, as we witness the complete collapse of ecosystems that had flourished for millions of years, we're also witnessing the beginning of one of the most remarkable recovery stories in the history of life on Earth. The age of dinosaurs is ending in fire and chaos, but from that chaos will eventually emerge the age of mammals, the age of flowering plants, and ultimately the age of human civilization. The cosmic accident that is destroying this ancient world is simultaneously creating the conditions that will allow entirely new forms of life to evolve and flourish. In destroying the old order, the asteroid impact is making space for evolutionary experiments that would have been impossible in a world dominated by giant reptiles. But that incredible story of recovery and renewal is still millions of years in the future. Right now, we're witnessing the darkest chapter in the history of complex life on Earth, as forces beyond imagination reshape our planet and determine which lineages will survive to see a new dawn. The worst is yet to come, and what happens in the hours and days following this cosmic catastrophe will determine the future of life on our planet for millions of years to come. 20 minutes after impact, something even more catastrophic begins to unfold across our planet. The debris that was blasted into space during those first terrifying seconds is now completing its ballistic journey around the globe. And what's about to happen will make the initial destruction look like a gentle warm-up act. Picture this. You're standing anywhere on Earth. Doesn't matter if you're thousands of kilometers from the impact site. And suddenly, the sky begins to glow. But this isn't the gentle light of sunrise or sunset. This is the ominous red glow of superheated rock fragments entering the atmosphere at velocities that turn them into cosmic bullets of molten death. The small mammals that had been desperately seeking shelter in their underground burrows suddenly find their refuges becoming death traps. The air temperature above ground rises so rapidly that it begins cooking everything on the surface. These tiny creatures, our own distant ancestors, press themselves deeper into whatever cracks and crevices they can find. But there's nowhere to hide from heat that penetrates deep into the earth itself. Their keen survival instincts, honed by millions of years of avoiding dinosaur predators, are utterly useless against this cosmic threat. The behavioral flexibility that had allowed them to thrive in a world dominated by giants means nothing when the very air becomes a furnace. Parents huddle over their young, following ancient protective instincts that offer no defense against thermal radiation from space. But here's what makes this moment absolutely mind-blowing. The debris raining down isn't just random chunks of rock. This is Earth material, pieces of our own planet that were launched into space and are now returning as weapons of mass extinction. Limestone from ancient sea floors, granite from continental bedrock, even vaporized ocean water, all superheated to temperatures that would liquefy steel. When these projectiles hit the atmosphere, They don't just burn up like normal meteors. They're traveling so fast and carrying so much thermal energy that they heat the entire atmosphere around them. The air itself becomes a weapon, reaching temperatures exceeding 800 degrees Celsius across the entire planet simultaneously. The great sauropod herds that had been seeking shelter in forest clearings find no escape from this global furnace. These magnificent giants, some weighing more than 10 modern elephants, had survived countless environmental challenges over millions of years. They had weathered ice ages, volcanic eruptions, and dramatic climate shifts. But nothing in their evolutionary history had prepared them for this. Their massive bodies, which had been such an advantage for reaching high vegetation and dominating their ecosystems, now become liabilities. The larger the creature, the more surface area exposed to the deadly thermal radiation now cooking everything on the planet's surface. Parents that had been protectively watching over their young can only watch helplessly as their offspring succumb to heat that no living creature can survive. The sounds of this global catastrophe are beyond description. The continuous thunder of debris impacts creates a noise so loud and persistent that it drowns out everything else. The roar of spontaneous combustion as organic material ignites across entire continents adds to the cacophony. And underneath it all, the desperate calls of creatures trying to find their family members in the chaos. Calls that grow weaker and fewer with each passing minute. 25 minutes after impact, the global firestorm reaches an intensity that defies belief. Every forest on every continent is now burning simultaneously. The grassland that had supported vast herbivore migrations are seas of flame stretching from horizon to horizon. Even the polar regions, which had been ice-free but relatively cool, are now experiencing temperatures that would kill any modern tropical species instantly. The pterosaurs that had been masters of the sky for over 100 million years find themselves in an atmosphere that no longer supports flight. The thermal updrafts they had relied on for efficient soaring are now superheated columns of death that would incinerate their flight membranes instantly. These aerial giants, some with wingspans rivaling small aircraft, crash to Earth as the very air they had conquered becomes their enemy. But perhaps the most tragic victims are the creatures caught in the open with nowhere to hide. The vast herds of duck-billed hadrosaurs that had been crossing open plains in their seasonal migrations find themselves exposed to thermal radiation with no shelter available. These highly social creatures, with their complex communication systems and cooperative behaviors, cluster together, following instincts that have served their species for millions of years. But clustering together only makes them easier targets for the heat raining down from above. The dominant adults position themselves around the edges of the group, instinctively trying to protect the young in the center. But there's no protection from a threat that comes from the sky itself. Their elaborate head crests, evolved for acoustic communication across vast distances, emit final calls that echo across landscapes already falling silent forever. The marine environments are experiencing their own unique form of apocalypse. The shallow seas that had teemed with life just half an hour ago are now boiling cauldrons of superheated water and steam. The thermal shock from the debris impacts has created temperature gradients so extreme they're literally cooking marine creatures from the outside in. Massive marine reptiles that had ruled these waters for geological ages find their aquatic refuge transformed into a death trap. Mosasaurs, those serpentine predators that had been perfectly adapted for high-speed pursuit through three-dimensional ocean environments, discover that the water around them has become too hot for their cold-blooded physiology to regulate. The complex marine food webs that had taken millions of years to evolve collapse in minutes as the microscopic organisms at the base of the food chain are killed by thermal shock. Phytoplankton, those tiny producers that had formed the foundation of ocean ecosystems since life first began, simply stop existing as water temperatures exceed their survival limits. 30 minutes after impact, something even more sinister begins to happen. The massive quantities of debris, smoke, and vaporized material being ejected into the atmosphere start to block sunlight from reaching the Earth's surface. This marks the beginning of what scientists call impact winter, a period of global darkness and cooling that will last for months. But here's the cruel irony. Just as the surface temperatures from the debris impacts begin to cool slightly, the lack of sunlight starts killing off the few organisms that might have survived the initial thermal pulse. Plants that had somehow escaped the global fires find themselves unable to photosynthesize in the perpetual twilight now settling over the planet. The herbivorous dinosaurs that had managed to find temporary shelter from the heat now face a different kind of death sentence. These creatures, perfectly adapted for processing enormous quantities of plant material, watch as their food sources wither and die in the growing darkness. The sophisticated digestive systems that had allowed them to extract nutrients from tough plant fibers become useless when there are no plants left to eat. But the carnivores face an even grimmer fate. The complex predator-prey relationships that had sustained them for millions of years collapse as their prey species succumb to the combined effects of thermal radiation and habitat destruction. Pack hunters that had coordinated their activities with tactical precision find themselves with nothing to hunt and nowhere to hunt it. Those magnificent feathered raptors, with their intelligence rivaling modern wolves and their social structures as complex as any modern predator, watch their world disappear before their eyes. Their colorful plumage, which had served as sophisticated communication tools, becomes matted with ash and debris. Their keen eyesight, evolved for tracking prey across vast distances, struggles to penetrate the growing darkness. 45 minutes after impact, the global catastrophe enters a new phase that scientists call the impact winter onset. The enormous quantities of pulverized rock, soot, and organic material suspended in the atmosphere have now reached such concentrations that they're blocking over 90% of sunlight from reaching the surface. This isn't just an overcast day. This is darkness so complete it approaches the conditions found in deep caves. Surface temperatures, which had been lethally hot just minutes before, now begin a precipitous drop that will eventually freeze most surface water across the planet. Any creature that survived the thermal pulse now faces the prospect of freezing to death in global winter conditions that will persist for months. The few remaining pterosaurs, those that had somehow found shelter from the initial thermal radiation, now discover that the atmospheric conditions have changed so dramatically that flight is no longer possible. The air density and chemical composition have been altered by the massive quantities of debris and gases injected into the atmosphere during the impact. These masters of aerial navigation, creatures that had successfully adapted to changing atmospheric conditions over millions of years of evolution, find themselves grounded in a world where the sky itself has become toxic. The sophisticated respiratory systems that had allowed them to extract oxygen efficiently at high altitudes are overwhelmed by atmospheric chemistry unlike anything in Earth's previous history. 1 hour after impact, as we witness the planet settling into an unnatural twilight that will last for months, the scope of this extinction event becomes clear. This isn't just the death of individual creatures or even entire species. This is the collapse of entire ecosystems that had taken hundreds of millions of years to evolve. The great predators that had ruled terrestrial environments for over 100 million years are experiencing the final chapter of their evolutionary story. Tyrannosaurus rex, those magnificent apex hunters with their incredible intelligence and powerful physiques, find themselves in a world where their predatory skills are meaningless. There's nothing left to hunt, nowhere safe to shelter, and no way to escape the global environmental collapse. These incredible creatures, each representing the pinnacle of predator evolution, face their extinction not through competition or disease, but through cosmic accident. Their massive skulls, housing brains sophisticated enough for complex problem-solving and long-term memory, cannot comprehend the forces that have doomed their world. But here's what makes this moment so scientifically fascinating. While we're witnessing the end of the age of giants, we're also seeing the beginning of evolutionary opportunities that will eventually give rise to entirely new forms of life. The small mammals cowering in their burrows, the few birds that might survive in protected microclimates, the tiny invertebrates sheltering in soil and leaf litter. These humble survivors will inherit a world freed from the dominance of giant reptiles. The environmental pressures now reshaping our planet will favor entirely different survival strategies. Small body size will become an advantage. Behavioral flexibility will be more important than specialized adaptations. The ability to survive on limited resources will matter more than the capacity to dominate vast territories. 90 minutes after impact, the transformation of our planet's atmosphere reaches a critical threshold. The debris cloud has now spread across the entire globe, creating a blanket of darkness so complete that photosynthesis becomes impossible almost everywhere on Earth's surface. This marks the beginning of an ecological collapse that will cascade through every level of the food web over the coming weeks and months. The few plant communities that had somehow survived the initial thermal pulse now begin dying from lack of sunlight. Forests that had stood for millions of years, their canopies reaching heights that won't be seen again for geological ages, slowly succumb to the perpetual darkness. The complex relationships between plants and their pollinators, partnerships that had been evolving for tens of millions of years, are severed forever. The great herbivore herds that had defined terrestrial ecosystems for so long face a slow starvation that's perhaps even more cruel than the quick death of thermal radiation. These creatures, perfectly adapted for processing vast quantities of vegetation, find their food sources disappearing day by day as plants die in the endless twilight. But some of the most heartbreaking casualties are the young animals that had been learning essential survival skills from their parents just hours before. Juvenile dinosaurs that have been absorbing millions of years of accumulated wisdom about migration routes, feeding strategies, and social behaviors find that knowledge becoming irrelevant in a world where the fundamental rules of survival have been rewritten. The parents, following instincts honed by countless generations, continue trying to teach and protect their offspring even as their world collapses around them. Maternal behaviors that had successfully ensured species survival for geological ages persist even when there's no longer any possibility of long-term survival. 2 hours after impact, as the global death toll climbs into the trillions, something remarkable begins to happen in the few locations where conditions allow for temporary survival. The creatures that do manage to find shelter and resources start displaying behaviors that will prove crucial for the eventual recovery of life on Earth. Small mammals, forced into closer proximity by the scarcity of safe refuges, begin forming social groups that transcend their normal territorial boundaries. Species that had been competitors just hours before now find themselves cooperating for mutual survival. These temporary alliances, forged in the crucible of global catastrophe, represent the beginning of new ecological relationships that will shape the post-extinction world. The few marine creatures that survive in isolated pockets of habitable water begin adapting to dramatically altered chemical and temperature conditions with a speed that defies normal evolutionary timescales. Extreme environmental pressure accelerates natural selection to rates that will allow rapid adaptation to the new world emerging from the ashes of the old. But perhaps most significantly, the genetic diversity bottleneck created by this mass extinction will channel future evolution in directions that would have been impossible in a world still dominated by dinosaurs. The few surviving lineages carry within their DNA the potential for explosive evolutionary radiation that will eventually fill the ecological niches left vacant by the extinction of the giants. 3 hours after impact, as our planet settles into the unnatural twilight that will define the coming months, we're witnessing one of the most important transitions in the history of life on Earth. The Mesozoic era, that incredible age of reptilian giants that had lasted for over 180 million years, is ending in darkness and devastation. But from this darkness will eventually emerge a new world, a world where mammals will grow large, where flowering plants will dominate terrestrial ecosystems, where birds will inherit the skies abandoned by pterosaurs, and where the stage will be set for the eventual evolution of intelligence capable of understanding the very cosmic forces that created this moment. The creatures dying in this global catastrophe have no way of knowing that their extinction is making possible the rise of forms of life that will eventually develop science, art, culture, and the ability to look back through time and understand what happened on this terrible day. The cosmic accident that is ending their world is simultaneously beginning ours. As we watch the final hours of the dinosaur age unfold in continued darkness and environmental chaos, we're not just witnessing death and destruction. We're witnessing one of evolution's greatest resets, a moment when life's trajectory is fundamentally altered, creating the conditions that will eventually allow consciousness itself to emerge from the ashes of this ancient world. The story of recovery from this catastrophe, the rise of mammals, the explosive diversification of flowering plants, and the eventual emergence of human civilization. That incredible tale of resilience and renewal awaits in the chapters to come. But for now, we leave our ancient world settling into its long winter, carrying within its few survivors the seeds of an entirely new chapter in the story of life on Earth. As we move into the fourth hour after impact, something truly chilling begins to happen across our devastated planet. The debris cloud that has plunged Earth into perpetual darkness starts to settle, but instead of bringing relief, this settling creates an even more sinister phase of the catastrophe. The falling particles aren't just blocking sunlight. They're creating a toxic rain of pulverized rock and ash that poisons whatever water sources manage to survive the initial thermal pulse. Picture this nightmare scenario. The few creatures that somehow found shelter from the global firestorm now emerge to find a world transformed beyond recognition. The familiar landscapes they had known for their entire lives have been erased. Rivers run black with contaminated sediment. Lakes have either boiled away entirely or become acidic pools incapable of supporting life. The very air carries particles so fine they penetrate deep into respiratory systems, slowly suffocating survivors from the inside out. The small mammals that represent our own evolutionary heritage face perhaps their greatest challenge yet. These resourceful creatures had survived the age of giants through intelligence and adaptability, but now they're confronting environmental conditions that push the limits of biological tolerance. Their underground burrows, which had provided sanctuary during the thermal pulse, are now flooded with toxic groundwater contaminated by the chemical chaos raging above. But here's what makes their struggle so remarkable. Even in these impossible conditions, some of these tiny survivors are beginning to display the behavioral innovations that will eventually allow life to recover. Groups of mammals that had never cooperated before start sharing limited food resources. Parents make incredible sacrifices to ensure their offspring have access to the cleanest water available. These acts of cooperation and sacrifice, born from desperation, represent the first stirrings of the social behaviors that will characterize the post-extinction world. Meanwhile, the marine environments are experiencing their own unique form of ongoing catastrophe. The tsunami waves generated by the initial impact have now circled the globe multiple times, each passage stirring up more sediment and debris from the ocean floor. Ancient marine ecosystems that had flourished in stable conditions for millions of years find their chemical and physical environment changing by the hour. The few marine creatures still clinging to life in isolated pockets of habitable water face a cruel irony. The very adaptations that had made them successful in the pre-impact world now work against them. Specialized filter feeders find their feeding apparatus clogged with debris. Creatures adapted for specific temperature ranges discover that thermal stability no longer exists anywhere in the global ocean system. Yet even in these dire circumstances, some marine survivors are beginning to show remarkable resilience. Species that had been minor players in pre-impact ecosystems suddenly find themselves inheriting vacant ecological niches. Small, generalist species that had lived in the shadows of giant marine reptiles now have access to resources and habitats that had been monopolized by their larger competitors for geological ages. 5 hours after impact, the global temperature begins a precipitous drop that will define the coming months. The debris cloud has now blocked so much sunlight that surface temperatures start plummeting toward freezing even in tropical regions. This temperature crash creates yet another wave of extinction as creatures adapted for the warm, stable climate of the late Cretaceous find themselves facing conditions more extreme than any ice age in Earth's previous history. The few remaining dinosaur populations, those that somehow survived the initial thermal pulse and global firestorm, now face this new challenge with physiological systems completely unprepared for rapid cooling. These creatures, many of which were likely warm-blooded, had evolved during millions of years of greenhouse conditions. Their metabolisms, perfectly tuned for warm, humid environments, simply cannot adapt quickly enough to the plummeting temperatures. But the cooling creates unexpected opportunities as well as challenges. Some creatures that had been forced into marginal habitats by the dominant reptiles now find that their smaller size and more efficient metabolism give them advantages in a resource-scarce world. The evolutionary pressure that had favored gigantism during the age of dinosaurs suddenly reverses, creating selection pressure for smaller, more energy-efficient body plans. The plant communities that form the foundation of all terrestrial food webs are experiencing perhaps the most dramatic transformation of all. The flowering plants that had been relatively recent evolutionary innovations just 66 million years ago suddenly find themselves inheriting a world where their more ancient competitors, the conifers and ferns that had dominated for hundreds of millions of years, are dying en masse in the perpetual darkness. Those flowering plants that do manage to survive in protected microclimates possess genetic innovations that will prove crucial for the recovery process. Their ability to form symbiotic relationships with fungi and bacteria gives them access to nutrients that other plant groups cannot utilize. Their more efficient reproductive strategies allow them to colonize disturbed habitats more quickly than their competitors. But perhaps most importantly, their co-evolutionary relationships with the few surviving mammals, birds, and insects create the foundation for entirely new ecological partnerships. The mutual dependencies between flowering plants and their animal partners, relationships that had been developing for tens of millions of years, now become the basis for ecosystem recovery on a global scale. 6 hours after impact, something extraordinary begins happening in the few locations where environmental conditions allow for temporary stability. Survivors from completely different taxonomic groups start forming unprecedented ecological alliances. Small mammals share shelter with early birds. Surviving reptiles tolerate the presence of competitors they would have driven away under normal circumstances. These temporary truces, forged by necessity, create opportunities for genetic and behavioral exchange that will influence evolutionary trajectories for millions of years to come. The social behaviors emerging from these crisis partnerships are unlike anything seen in the pre-impact world. Creatures that had been solitary for millions of years of evolution suddenly discover the survival advantages of cooperation. Parental care behaviors extend beyond species boundaries as desperate adults adopt orphaned young regardless of their taxonomic relationships. These behavioral innovations, born from the extreme selection pressure of global catastrophe, represent evolutionary experiments that would have been impossible in a world still dominated by established ecological hierarchies. The breakdown of normal competitive relationships creates space for entirely new forms of social organization that will characterize the recovery period. Meanwhile, the atmospheric chemistry continues its chaotic transformation. The massive quantities of sulfur compounds ejected during the impact create acid rain so concentrated it strips leaves from any vegetation that somehow survived the initial destruction. Rivers and lakes become so acidic they dissolve the shells and bones of dead creatures, creating a grotesque soup that further contaminates the few remaining water sources. Yet even this chemical chaos creates unexpected evolutionary opportunities. Some microorganisms, previously confined to extreme environments like volcanic hot springs, suddenly find the entire planet transformed into habitat they can exploit. These extremophile bacteria and archaea begin proliferating in the toxic conditions, starting the long process of ecosystem restoration from the microbial level up. The role of these microscopic survivors cannot be overstated. While the charismatic megafauna captures our attention, the real heroes of the recovery story are the invisible organisms that begin rebuilding the chemical cycles essential for all life. Their ability to process toxic compounds and restore atmospheric and aquatic chemistry will determine which of the larger survivors can eventually establish viable populations. 8 hours after impact, the few remaining pterosaurs face their final chapter in one of evolution's most successful experiments in powered flight. These magnificent creatures, masters of the sky for over 100 million years, find themselves grounded in a world where the very atmosphere has become their enemy. Their sophisticated flight membranes, evolved for maximum efficiency in stable atmospheric conditions, cannot cope with the toxic particles and altered air density of the post-impact world. But their extinction represents more than just the loss of individual species. With the pterosaurs dies an entire evolutionary approach to aerial locomotion that will never be replicated. Their unique wing structure, their specialized respiratory systems, their incredible size range, all of these innovations disappear forever, leaving the skies empty for millions of years until much smaller dinosaurian descendants eventually evolve their own solutions to powered flight. The few birds that survive this aerial apocalypse do so not through superior flight capabilities, but through behavioral flexibility and smaller size. Their feathered insulation provides some protection against the cooling temperatures. Their more generalized diets allow them to survive on whatever food sources remain available. Most importantly, their smaller energy requirements mean they can sustain themselves on the limited resources of the post-impact world. These avian survivors carry within their DNA the genetic toolkit that will eventually allow them to radiate into the ecological niches abandoned by pterosaurs. But that radiation is still millions of years in the future. For now, they represent tiny flickering flames of evolutionary potential in a world growing colder and darker by the hour. The marine realm continues its own transformation as the chemical composition of seawater undergoes changes more dramatic than anything in geological history. The massive quantities of vaporized rock and organic material dissolved in the oceans create chemical conditions that haven't existed since the planet's earliest history. Most marine creatures, adapted for the stable chemistry of Cretaceous seas, simply cannot survive in water that has become an alien medium. Yet some marine lineages possess the genetic flexibility to begin adapting to these extreme conditions. Small, genderless species that had been evolutionary also-rans for millions of years suddenly find themselves inheriting oceanic ecosystems. Their ability to tolerate variable conditions, previously a minor advantage, becomes the key to survival in a world where environmental stability no longer exists. The few surviving marine reptiles face challenges that push their physiological limits beyond the breaking point. These creatures, perfectly adapted for hunting in clear, warm waters, find themselves in murky, chemically altered seas where their sensory systems no longer function effectively. Their specialized feeding strategies become useless when their traditional prey species have been eliminated by environmental changes. But even as these giants face extinction, their ecological roles begin to be filled by much smaller survivors. Fish species that had lived in the shadow of marine reptiles for geological ages suddenly have access to resources and habitats that had been monopolized by their larger competitors. This ecological release creates opportunities for rapid evolutionary diversification that will eventually restore marine ecosystem complexity. 10 hours after impact, the global death toll has reached proportions that challenge our ability to comprehend. Trillions of individual organisms have perished, representing the accumulated biological diversity of hundreds of millions of years of evolution. Entire taxonomic groups that had been successful for geological ages have been wiped out completely, their evolutionary experiments terminated by cosmic accident. But within this unprecedented destruction, the seeds of recovery are already beginning to germinate. The survivors, though few in number, carry within their genetic codes the information necessary to rebuild ecosystem complexity from the ground up. Their small populations, compressed by environmental catastrophe, become crucibles of rapid evolutionary change as natural selection operates with intensity rarely seen in Earth's history. The genetic bottlenecks created by mass extinction accelerate evolutionary processes that normally take millions of years. Surviving populations, isolated by habitat destruction and climate change, begin diverging rapidly as they adapt to local conditions. These isolated populations become the founding stock for the explosive evolutionary radiations that will characterize the recovery period. The few remaining large herbivores face perhaps the most poignant struggle of all. These magnificent creatures, representing the culmination of over 100 million years of plant-eating evolution, watch their food sources disappear day by day as vegetation dies in the perpetual darkness. Their sophisticated digestive systems, perfectly adapted for processing specific types of plant material, become useless when those plants no longer exist. Their final days are spent wandering through landscapes transformed beyond recognition, following ancient migration routes that no longer lead to food or shelter. The accumulated wisdom of countless generations, knowledge about seasonal cycles, feeding strategies, and social behaviors dies with them, representing one of the greatest losses of biological information in Earth's history. Yet even in their dying, these giants contribute to the recovery process. Their massive carcasses provide concentrated sources of nutrients for the scavengers and decomposers that will form the foundation of post-extinction food webs. The calcium from their bones will eventually become available for new generations of organisms. Their deaths, tragic as they are, become part of the nutrient cycling that will support future ecosystem development. 12 hours after impact, as our planet settles into what will become known as the longest night in the history of complex life, something remarkable begins to emerge from the chaos. The few survivors, scattered across isolated refugia, start displaying innovations that will prove crucial for long-term recovery. These innovations aren't just random mutations. They represent targeted responses to the specific challenges of the post-impact world. Small mammals begin developing enhanced sensory capabilities that allow them to navigate in near-total darkness. Their already keen sense of smell becomes even more acute, allowing them to locate food sources and avoid dangers in environments where vision is useless. Their social behaviors become more sophisticated as cooperation becomes essential for survival. The surviving birds start modifying their foraging strategies, learning to exploit food sources that would have been ignored in the pre-impact world. Seeds buried in soil, insects hiding in bark crevices, even carrion from the massive die-off. These become the foundation of their survival strategy. Their behavioral flexibility, always one of their greatest assets, proves crucial for adapting to a world where traditional food sources no longer exist. But perhaps, most importantly, the survivors begin developing the energy-efficient lifestyles that will characterize the post-dinosaur world. The age of giants is ending, and with it, the evolutionary strategies that favored maximum size and specialized adaptations. The future belongs to creatures that can survive on minimal resources, adapt quickly to changing conditions, and exploit whatever opportunities the recovering world provides. As we move toward the end of this first terrible day, the scope of transformation becomes clear. This isn't just a mass extinction. It's a complete reorganization of life's trajectory on Earth. The evolutionary pathways that had been established over hundreds of millions of years have been severed, creating opportunities for entirely new directions in biological innovation. The creatures that survived this cosmic catastrophe will inherit a world freed from the competitive pressures that had constrained evolution for geological ages. The ecological niches left vacant by extinct giants will eventually be filled by their descendants, but in ways that would have been impossible while the dinosaurs still ruled the Earth. 18 hours after impact, as the first full night of the post-dinosaur world settles over our planet, we're witnessing not just an ending, but a beginning, the seeds of mammalian dominance, of flowering plant supremacy, of avian mastery of the skies, and ultimately of human consciousness itself, lie dormant in the few survivors now struggling through this darkest chapter in the history of life. The story of recovery from this catastrophe will take millions of years to unfold. But it begins here, in these desperate hours when life's greatest survivors prove that existence itself is more resilient than any cosmic accident. From the ashes of this ancient world will eventually rise forms of life capable of understanding their own origins, of looking back through deep time, and of grasping the cosmic forces that shaped their evolutionary destiny. But that incredible story of renewal and innovation awaits in the deep future. For now, our devastated planet settles into its long winter, carrying within its few survivors the genetic information that will eventually give rise to the modern world we know today. 24 hours after impact, as we complete our journey through the last day of the dinosaurs, something profound becomes clear. This single day has changed everything. The world that existed when the sun rose this morning no longer exists. In its place lies a planet transformed, wounded, but not defeated. The age of reptilian giants is over, but the age of mammalian innovation is about to begin. The few survivors now scattered across isolated refugia carry within their DNA the blueprints for an entirely new chapter in the story of life on Earth. Their struggle through this cosmic catastrophe represents one of evolution's greatest triumphs, proof that life itself is more resilient than any force the universe can deploy against it. From this darkest moment in the history of complex life will eventually emerge diversity more spectacular than anything the dinosaur age ever produced. The mammals will grow large and diverse. The birds will inherit the skies. The flowering plants will paint the world in colors the Mesozoic never knew. And from one lineage of small, clever survivors will eventually arise consciousness capable of understanding the very cosmic forces that created this moment of transformation. The last day of the dinosaurs is ending, but the first day of our world has already begun. As we witness the end of this catastrophic day, something absolutely extraordinary begins to emerge from the devastation. While the immediate destruction captures our attention, the real story lies in what's happening beneath the surface, literally and figuratively. The survivors clinging to life in scattered refuges aren't just enduring this cosmic catastrophe. They're already beginning the most remarkable comeback story in Earth's entire history. Picture this incredible scene unfolding across our wounded planet. In underground burrows, caves, and protected microclimates, tiny pockets of life are making decisions that will echo through millions of years of future evolution. These aren't conscious choices, of course, but the brutal selection pressure of this global catastrophe is already favoring traits that will define the post-dinosaur world. The small mammals huddled in their shelters are undergoing changes that would normally take thousands of generations to develop. Extreme environmental stress accelerates evolution in ways that seem almost impossible. Individuals with even slightly better cold tolerance survive, while others perish. Those with more efficient metabolisms can stretch limited food resources further. Behavioral flexibility becomes more valuable than specialized adaptations that are now useless in this transformed world. But here's what makes this moment so scientifically fascinating. We're not just witnessing death and destruction. We're watching evolution itself pivot toward entirely new strategies for survival. The traits that made creatures successful during the Age of Giants, massive size, specialized diets, complex territorial behaviors, are becoming evolutionary dead ends. The future belongs to the small, the adaptable, and the cooperative. In the few marine environments where life persists, something equally remarkable is happening. Fish species that had been minor players in dinosaur age ecosystems suddenly find themselves inheriting oceanic territories that had been dominated by giant reptiles for over 100 million years. These humble survivors begin expanding into ecological roles they never could have accessed while the marine giants were alive. The chemical chaos in the oceans, devastating as it is, creates opportunities for evolutionary innovation that wouldn't have existed in stable conditions. Creatures that can tolerate variable salinity, temperature fluctuations, and altered water chemistry gain enormous advantages over their more specialized competitors. Natural selection begins favoring generalists over specialists on a global scale. Meanwhile, the atmospheric transformation continues to reshape the very nature of terrestrial life. The prolonged darkness forces fundamental changes in how organisms obtain and use energy. Plants that survive in protected locations begin developing more efficient photosynthetic systems to capture whatever minimal sunlight penetrates the debris cloud. These innovations will eventually give flowering plants decisive advantages over their ancient competitors. But perhaps the most crucial development is happening in the social realm. Creatures that had been solitary for millions of years are discovering the survival advantages of cooperation. Shared body heat becomes essential for surviving the plummeting temperatures. Cooperative foraging allows access to food sources that individuals couldn't exploit alone. Group vigilance provides protection in a world full of new dangers. These emergency social behaviors represent the first stirrings of the complex mammalian societies that will eventually dominate the post-extinction world. The parental care strategies that had evolved during the dinosaur age become even more sophisticated, as parents must now protect their offspring from environmental threats unlike anything their species had previously encountered. The few birds that survived this aerial apocalypse face challenges that will fundamentally reshape their evolutionary trajectory. With pterosaurs eliminated and atmospheric conditions transformed, these small dinosaurian descendants inherit skies that won't be fully occupied again for millions of years. But their inheritance comes with a terrible price. They must survive in air that has become toxic and unstable. Those that do survive begin developing respiratory and metabolic adaptations that will prove crucial for their eventual radiation into the ecological niches left vacant by pterosaurs. Their small size, which had been a disadvantage in competition with giant flying reptiles, becomes an asset in a world where energy efficiency matters more than competitive dominance. The plant communities that form the foundation of all terrestrial ecosystems are undergoing their own revolutionary transformation. The conifers and ferns that had dominated land plants for hundreds of millions of years find their conservative survival strategies inadequate for the rapidly changing conditions. Their slow growth rates and specialized environmental requirements become liabilities in a world where adaptability is everything. Flowering plants, despite being relative newcomers to terrestrial ecosystems, possess innovations that prove perfectly suited for recovery from catastrophic disturbance. Their rapid reproduction cycles allow quick colonization of disturbed habitats. Their partnerships with animal pollinators create mutual support networks that enhance survival for both plants and animals. Most importantly, their ability to form symbiotic relationships with soil microorganisms gives them access to nutrients that other plant groups cannot utilize. As the debris cloud begins its slow settling process over the coming weeks, these surviving plant communities will become the foundation for entirely new types of ecosystems. The forests that eventually regrow will be dominated by flowering trees rather than conifers. The understory will teem with flowering shrubs and herbs instead of ancient fern species. The very structure of terrestrial plant communities is being rewritten by this cosmic accident. But the most profound changes are happening at the molecular level, in the genetic codes of the survivors themselves. The extreme bottlenecking of populations creates conditions where random genetic drift becomes as important as natural selection. Small founding populations carry only tiny fractions of their species' original genetic diversity. But they also carry unique combinations of genes that will become the foundation for explosive evolutionary radiations. The mammals that emerge from this catastrophe will be fundamentally different from their dinosaur-age ancestors. Genetic innovations that had been suppressed by competitive pressure from reptilian giants will suddenly become advantageous. Metabolic pathways that had been evolutionary curiosities will become mainstream adaptations. Behavioral tendencies that had been minor variations will become species-defining characteristics. This genetic reshuffling creates the raw material for evolutionary experiments on a scale rarely seen in Earth's history. The vacant ecological niches left by extinct dinosaurs will eventually be filled by mammalian descendants, but in ways that would have been impossible while the giants still ruled. Some mammals will grow large again, but they'll do so using entirely different physiological strategies than their reptilian predecessors. The marine realm undergoes its own genetic revolution as surviving fish lineages begin radiating into the ecological roles previously occupied by marine reptiles. Some will become large predators, others filter feeders, still others deep-sea specialists. But they'll accomplish these roles using fish physiology rather than reptilian adaptations, creating marine ecosystems that are functionally similar to, but structurally different from their dinosaur age predecessors. As we move through the long months of impact winter that lie ahead, these genetic and behavioral innovations will be tested by some of the most extreme environmental conditions in Earth's history. Global temperatures will drop to levels not seen since the planet's earliest ice ages. Photosynthesis will remain impossible across most of the planet's surface. Food webs will remain collapsed for extended periods. Yet even these harsh conditions serve evolutionary purposes. The survivors that emerge from impact winter will be tested by selection pressures so intense they'll represent the most resilient life forms their lineages have ever produced. These tested survivors become the founding stock for the explosive diversification that will characterize the early Paleogene period. The recovery process itself creates new evolutionary pressures that favor innovation over conservative survival strategies. Empty ecological niches create opportunities for rapid adaptive radiation. Reduced competition allows experimentation with new body plans and lifestyles. The absence of established predator-prey relationships permits the evolution of entirely new feeding strategies. But perhaps most importantly, the breakdown of established ecological hierarchies creates space for evolutionary innovations that had been impossible during the stable conditions of the dinosaur age. The genetic toolkit that will eventually produce whales, elephants, primates, and countless other mammalian forms already exists within the small survivors now struggling through impact winter. The flowering plants that survive in protected refugia carry within their genetic codes the potential for even more dramatic transformations. Their descendants will eventually create the grasslands that support vast herds of grazing mammals. They'll evolve into the fruit trees that sustain primate communities. They'll develop the grains that will eventually support human civilization. The few birds that make it through this aerial catastrophe possess the evolutionary potential to eventually reclaim the skies abandoned by pterosaurs. Their descendants will grow large and diverse, eventually producing forms as varied as eagles, hummingbirds, penguins, and ostriches. But they'll achieve this diversity using fundamentally different anatomical solutions than their pterosaurian predecessors. As our planet slowly emerges from its cosmic trauma over the coming millennia, these humble survivors will prove that evolution's greatest triumphs often emerge from its darkest moments. The mass extinction that ended the dinosaur age didn't just clear ecological space for new forms of life. It created the environmental pressures and genetic opportunities that made entirely new levels of biological complexity possible. The mammals that eventually inherit the Earth will develop social structures more complex than anything seen during the reptilian age. Their enhanced parental care, sophisticated communication systems, and cooperative behaviors will create the foundation for intelligence levels that dwarf anything achieved by their dinosaurian predecessors. The flowering plants that come to dominate terrestrial ecosystems will create landscapes more diverse and productive than the conifer fern forests they replace. Their coevolutionary relationships with animal partners will generate biological complexity that transforms the very nature of terrestrial life. The birds that eventually master the post-pterosaur skies will achieve levels of flight performance and behavioral sophistication that exceed even their magnificent reptilian predecessors. Their migrations will connect continents, their songs will fill forests, and their intelligence will rival that of mammals in many ecological contexts. But the most remarkable outcome of this cosmic catastrophe lies still millions of years in the future. From one lineage of small, adaptable mammals will eventually emerge consciousness, capable of understanding the very forces that created this moment of transformation. The descendants of creatures now cowering in burrows will eventually develop science, art, philosophy, and the ability to look back through deep time and comprehend their own evolutionary origins. The asteroid impact that ended the dinosaur age didn't just reset evolution's trajectory, it made possible the emergence of awareness itself. The cosmic accident that brought death to the giants ultimately gave birth to minds capable of pondering their place in the universe. From the ashes of this ancient catastrophe will eventually arise intelligence sophisticated enough to prevent future cosmic impacts, to explore other worlds, and to ensure that consciousness itself survives whatever challenges the universe might present. As we conclude our journey through the last day of the dinosaurs, we're left with a profound realization. This wasn't just a day of ending, it was a day of beginning. The destruction we've witnessed wasn't meaningless cosmic violence. It was the creative force that made our own existence possible. Every sunrise we've ever seen, every flower we've ever admired, every moment of consciousness we've ever experienced, traces its origins back to this terrible and wonderful day when the universe rolled its dice and came up with us. The dinosaurs had their magnificent run, 165 million years of evolutionary success that may never be equaled, but their ending became our beginning. Their extinction, our opportunity, their cosmic tragedy, our evolutionary triumph. In losing the age of giants, life gained the potential for something even more extraordinary, the age of awareness.